Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and 4, between both chapters, hear the word of the Lord. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for him than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart, with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from that dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes downward to the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of the oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought, the dead who are already dead, more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw all the toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and is striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and a striving after wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, and yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor. And I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end to all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and a striving after wind. May the Lord add His blessings to the reading of His holy word. Well, are you excited? A new season is about to start this Saturday. Joshua's excited. He knows what it's about. Of course, I'm talking about college football season. My yearly soap opera-like drama in which the goal is to avoid defeat almost every Saturday, and in the end, in January, be the team lifting up the trophy. Champions! The season is almost on us. I know you're all very excited about that. The signs, you'll see the signs all around you. There'll be games on TVs. Some people put flags of their teams on their cars or on their houses. Maybe football isn't your thing. The season for school is here. It's almost here. Virginia schools have already started. Some of you have already sent your kids back to school, back to the routine of getting up early, getting him or her to school in time. Caswell County has another week of the old season of summer vacation. Here in Caswell County, I can tell the season's created, the end of the old season's created a sense of uneasiness among the kids with this change coming up. Last week, none of the usual guys I pick up for gym came. As soon as the new season is underway, a new routine then has settled in, the guys will probably be back in force. I've been through this every year. You see the rhythm of up and down in gym and how it affects things. Soon it will be getting dark early, and then even more guys will come because they won't be able to play in the outdoor courts. And that's how the seasons affect us here. How do the seasons affect you? I'm told that restaurants get more business in the winter. Hot foods, that kind of thing, become more popular. Some people, though, are emotionally affected by the change of seasons. There's even a psychological disorder. I'm not sure whether it's really official or not, but they call it seasonal affective disorder. Sad. Less sunlight in the winter and colder weather. It keeps people inside, and so it leads some to depression. Mary found it especially hard the first winter we lived in Chicago. Not only was the winter there long and cold, Chicago is mostly overcast in the winter. And during the first January we were there, it had only 1 hour of sunshine the whole month. That's hard to take, especially if you're from Singapore, where there's no winter, just perpetual summer all year round, near the equator. And so the daylight times don't change. The only real seasons that I can tell, they say there's a dry season. Seems like it rains a lot during whatever dry season is. The only seasons that I can tell are the man-made ones. Holidays, and that's mostly Chinese New Year. And like here, of course, the school year. Now, some people love the changes of seasons. They'll fly a summer or a fall or a spring or I missed one, winter, a flag. They'll decorate their houses and their yard according to the seasons. In about 6 weeks, we're going to see a lot of Halloween decorations come up, and then soon after that, Christmas lights. They're constantly marking time by celebrating the seasons. You can see signs of the seasons. And soon we'll start to see the leaves turning colors, and seasons affect what you see. Your personal season of life affects how you see. If you're a child, saw was a basketball court. And that looks like fun to him. Looks like a place to play. That's what you see. His season of life affects what he sees. A ball in the court, that's fun. Now, if you're older, a little more responsible, you see something, maybe something that'll keep your kids happy, or maybe help them with their development, place to work out, or maybe a place you have to clean. If you're like me, see a gym, you see a place like that, you're going to attract youth with that. And use that for church, use that for evangelism. What do you see in your season of life? Here we see seasons, here in this passage, seasons and sightings. First, seasons. What season are you in? Do you know? For everything there is a season. Don't try to stay in a season that's past. Nostalgic, sentimental people often try to stay in a past season that they just loved it back then and they want to stay there. And they miss the season they're in. They say, stop the world, I want to get off. They want to camp on some season. And when they think that life is as good as it can possibly be, maybe when they were young, when they were full of dreams, they thought they had a great future, or when the kids are young and they were fun to play with, or marriage is sweet, or the career looks promising. Maybe they loved high school. They love hanging out with friends and dances and that kind of thing. And so they spend their old age trying to go back to that. They go to reunions and they still have dances and clubs. Others love college, and so they're trying to cling to the college life Still go to the games and hang out with the same people. For some young adults, there's what they call a failure to launch, of never quite being able to grow up and move on. Still living with a sense of dependence, unable to become a real adult. But life refuses to keep still. And you have to be able to change with the seasons. For everything, there is a season. Some people think there's never a time or a place for some things. For everything, there is a season. Some people think, no, there's not seasons for some things. They want everything to be positive and encouraging. Always about being born, never to die. Always to heal, never to kill. Always to build up, never to break down. Always laughing, never crying. Always dancing, never mourning. Always weddings, never funerals. Always keeping, never casting away. Always speaking, never quiet. Always loving, never hating. Always at peace, never at war. Indeed, some people think such one-sided lives are precisely what it means to be spiritual, to always be about the positive, never the negative. Don't even acknowledge that the negative exists. And they think they can live in a bubble sealed off from all negatives, from death, from killing, from breaking down, from weeping, from mourning, from funerals, from casting away, from tearing, from silence, from hatred, from anger, from war. When I was a teenager with my extended family or outside a hospital, and we could see the staff from a distance load a corpse with a sheet draped over it into the back of a hearse. And my aunt said to one of her children, my cousin, "Don't look! Let's pretend that there's not death. Let's pretend there's not a season, not a time for that." When our dog died about a decade ago, I made sure our boys took part in burying her. Now, I could have buried her myself when they were at school. Go buy another dog. Let's pretend, or make up the story. We sent her to a farm. Could have tried to cover it over somehow, like some people do. But I made sure that they took part in burying her when they got back from school, so they would know that there's a time to die. You need to know that. Our culture doesn't want to admit that there's a time to die. Oh, they'll say they know that they're going to die, but they don't really believe it. A Switchfoot song puts it, she pretends that she's immortal. The culture thinks we're immortal, and when we remind them, now you're going to die, they'll say, I'm just pretending. But really, they're pretending that they're pretending. That's why over the last 2 years we saw such a panic over a virus that in fact didn't turn out all that deadly. At least not for most people. Turned out deadly for some particular kinds of people in certain specific groups. But for most people who are young and middle-aged, relatively healthy, it's not particularly severe. But if you've ever tried to calm someone down from the hysteria, assure them that if they're young and healthy, there's very little danger from COVID, only whatever tiny % chance of dying, and for healthy children, there's really almost no chance at all. If you ever try to calm someone down from the hysteria that was around, their response first is, there's a chance. You say there's a small chance, but there's a chance, however small, that I could die from this. And then, second, how dare you monster, for being so cold-hearted not to care that I or someone could die. Oh yes, there's a chance. There's always a chance. You are going to die. There's a season for death. It might come slowly and predictably, like winter. You know it's coming a certain time. Or it might come suddenly like a bolt of lightning. Now, until it comes, this is the season to live. Don't live not to die. Don't be careless, but don't stop living just out of fear of death. So you can live indefinitely in a lockdown, sealed off from all germs because you want to live forever. It's impossible. It's trying to live not to die. The season for death is coming. You can't stop it. Until it comes, live. Live in this season to live. Because when it's time to die, you won't be able to go back. Now, some people read that poem, this first 8 verses, and think this guy called Koheleth, the preacher, translated here, that he's cyclical. Talking about cycles. We're going through cycles, seasons of being born and dying and planting, harvesting, killing and healing, breaking down and building up and so forth. They think the preacher is like a Hindu. teaching samsara. That's the name of the Hindu doctrine. Eternally repeating cycles of birth and then misery, which is what they see as life, and death, and then rebirth, reincarnation, and then another life, and as miserable as it is, and then death, and over again, and it never ends. Like the hands of a clock, which never unwinds or never runs out of batteries, just keeps on going around and around, eternally cyclical. But that's not what he's saying. Now, sure, some things that he talks about here, some things do repeat. They do have cycles. They have seasons. If you're a farmer, you plant in the spring and you harvest in the fall. You heal your animals when they're hurt and then slaughter them when it's time. You might have a spring cleaning when you get rid of a lot of stuff, and then you have a shopping season when you get more stuff. You might go through a season of having your own children, your own grandchildren, or through a season of burying your grandparents and parents. You see weddings, wedding receptions, or you go to funerals, depending on your season in life. But that doesn't mean that first pair of times, a time to be born and a time to die, is something you'll re-experience over and over, cyclically. The first pair of times shows us that though some seasons repeat in cycles for a while, like a song set on repeat, just after it's done, as it loops around, starts over again, eventually there comes a time, a season, to end all seasons. A time when the cycles stop. There's a time to be born and a time to die, and in between is the time to live without pretending that the season for death isn't coming. You'll never get another time to be born or die. In fact, that's kind of the theme of Ecclesiastes, isn't it? That this death is coming, as he'll say later in chapter 4. We die like the animals, and that's it. So not in all insinuating that we'll be born again, reincarnate, and die again. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27 says that it is appointed by God. God has appointed that we die once, and then comes the judgment. In between our birth and our death, we experience seasons, repetitious times, rhythms of life, like going around on a merry-go-round. And we get the feeling, I've seen that before. Go around again, there it is again. We've seen summer and fall and winter and spring before. We know how it goes. I've been around the block a few times, Sonny, we tell people. This isn't my first rodeo. I know the routine. All that kind of thing. Seed is planted, then crops are gathered. Animals grow and then sent to the slaughterhouse. People die. We have funerals and cry. People graduate or get married or whatever. We celebrate something. We have a party. We laugh or dance. We run or we play. We get injured. We heal. We go back to it. Some go through cycles of gaining weight, then exercising, losing weight, and it goes on like that. We acquire stuff. We get rid of stuff. Then we get more stuff. We have Christmas and New Year's and Easter and Mother's Day and summer and between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Then Thanksgiving, it's Christmas again, and it seems to go on and on. We even get into routines of shopping. We know we got to shop because Christmas is coming. We get decorating. We can get the illusion that the whole life is like that it's all repeatable. But one day the music stops, the merry-go-round grinds to a halt, and we have to get off. The cycles, the seasons, our experience of repetition, all these things can fool us into thinking their whole life is like that. Samsara, the Hindus call it. Cycles of birth and death. But it isn't. Birth and death is the beginning and the end of those other seasons. Someone introduced me before I started to preach at a church in Oakland, California, with, John is here to help you know how to die. Some people may not like that introduction. I kind of like it. If you don't know you're going to die, and after that the judgment, you won't be ready for that season when it comes, and it is coming. Like winter or like lightning. And you won't be able to make the most of this season, the season to live. You might make the horrible mistake, the horrendous mistake of wasting your life trying not to die. Well, those are the seasons. Some cyclical for a season, some not. And there are sightings. Several times in this passage, at least 6 times in this passage, he says, I saw. You notice that? What do you see in this season to live? In fall, you see football and brightly colored leaves. In winter, you might see snow. In spring, you see new leaves, you see flowers. In summer, you see greenery, growing crops. And here the preacher sees 6 things in this season. First, the business. Second, wickedness. Third, oppression. Then envy. And then vapor. And finally, youth. The illusions of the promise of youth. The illusionary promise of youth. First, the business, though. The preacher says in verse 10, I've seen the business. What's the business you should be up to in this season? What's your business now? Starting in verse 9. Well, if you're in the restaurant business, the most popular foods change according to seasons. If you're a multi-sport athlete, what you play changes with the season. Coming up on football season, and later it'll be basketball. If you're a teacher, whether and what you teach depends on the season. Maybe some others, you have different seasons that affect what you're doing. In verse 9, what gain has the worker from his toil? Remember, gain means profit, getting more than what you started with. And remember from last week, since the end is death, and we all die with exactly what we were born with, which is nothing, then what are you working for? What's the worker here working for? The preacher says, I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man. In Hebrew, of Adam. The cynic, the depressed person says, well, since it's all vanity, it's vapor, it's useless, and there's no business that we need to be doing. Just drop out, give up, live with the attitude of, whatever, dude. But that's wrong. Everything under the sun might be vanity, but God has given us some business to take care of. In verse 11, God has made everything, all those things for which there is a season under heaven, beautiful in His time. The business He's given us to do is beautiful if the timing is right. There's something beautiful about a child playing. Now, you're 70 years old and you're out trying to play. That's a little odd. It's probably not beautiful. Know what your season is. God has placed eternity in our hearts. Unlike animals, we yearn for something more than just to have food and to drink and safety and to reproduce. We want something eternal. We keep trying to make the things we make, our work, our money, our family, our fun, our games, the football championship. Keep trying to make it eternal, to make it meaningful. Something that will last forever. And we're frustrated when it's not, when we find it's like vapor because it's under the sun. Whatever team wins this season, next year at this time, it won't matter much. If you look into the next season, you'll forget about it. So we're frustrated when it's not eternal, vapor-like. We long to escape the transience of this always changing life. We step into a river, we step out, step back in again, we step into a different river. We want something that lasts, and we can't find it here under the sun. And so maybe we try to study God, study theology, go to church, listen to long sermons, but we're frustrated because we can only see so little at once. Like a seriously, desperately nearsighted man trying to take in a huge painting, but he's only able to see a few inches ahead of him as he creeps along looking at it. That's like us trying to study God. So at the end of verse 11, he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. We can't see the big picture. So what's our business? In verse 12, there's nothing better than to be joyful. Enjoy your life. Since this is the season to live, enjoy it. Do good. In verse 13, eat and drink and take pleasure in your work. This is God's gift to man, to you. He's given you a capacity to enjoy. Use it. Our business isn't to try to figure God out. We can't. Our business is to do what God has given us to do and enjoy it. For everything there is a season. We sometimes want it to stop, to freeze in one place, maybe to go back, to make something, a life that's eternal. We have a yearning for the eternal in our hearts, even though we live in a world that's always changing. The preacher says in verse 14, I know that whatever God does endures forever. Everything we do is vapor, is a puff of wind, doesn't last. It's all forgotten, and soon so are we. But everything that God does lasts. We can't add to it or take anything from it. God has done this. He's made it so that everything we do is futile. He's subjected creation to futility, so that our works end in nothing, and everything He does is eternal. We can't make more of it. We can't make less of it. God has made our lives like this so that we would fear Him. We would tremble at His word. We would know that He's the Creator, the one longing for eternity in our hearts reaches out for. The only way that we can have that our longing for eternity satisfied is by doing the business God gave us to do. Fear Him. Let's revere Him. Glorify Him. Enjoy Him. Right? The Catechism says, what's the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. See Him seek what has been driven away. That's our business. Second, in this season of living under the sun, we see wickedness. Starting verse 16. I saw, what's the sighting? Under the sun, that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. The problem isn't just that there's wickedness among criminals, in the mafia, in gangs, with the immoral. We expect wickedness there. Notice what he says, in the place of justice, he saw wickedness. The problem is where justice should be, where right should be declared right and wrong should be denounced as wrong, in courts and in pulpits and the government and in churches, right there instead is crime, is corruption, is sin, is evil, is greed, is injustice, is telling people whatever they want to hear instead of the truth. In the past, in this country, instead of justice for black people, there was slavery, enforced by the state, declared in laws and verdicts from judges on benches, the Dred Scott decision, the Fugitive Slave Act, and then segregation. And preachers in the South, at least, upheld it. When Charles Spurgeon spoke out against slavery, clearly denounced it from London, Southern preachers and editors denounced and threatened him. Now, in our day, instead of protecting the least of these, the most vulnerable, the preborn, courts or legislatures declare that they can be killed at our convenience. And some preachers remain silent about that, or about sexual immorality. They won't speak up against that, or the perversion of marriage, or maybe they actually support it. Where there should be righteousness, there's wickedness. That's what the preacher saw then, and that's what he'd still see a lot of today. But the time will come, in verse 17, for judgment. God has a season in which He will judge everything. The season now, in verse 18, he says, is for testing. For God to see who will take the side of justice and righteousness when wickedness isn't being clearly, immediately punished. Right? That's right now. Sometimes wickedness is not severely, immediately punished like it is going to be. That's our season now. When it sometimes appears to be thriving, appears to be successful. When polls show that whatever majority of Americans support whatever injustice, whatever perversion, when the wrong is now strong. So strong. Now then, in this time when the wrong is strong, do you believe that God is the ruler yet? God is testing us to see if we know they're going to die like the animals. In verse 19, just like animals die, so do we, except we see judgment. Do you know that? If so, it will show in you now taking the side of justice and righteousness. Here and now. Even when the wrong seems oft so strong. Just like animals, we die and our bodies go to the dust. In verse 20, dust to dust. Sure, the spirit of people, in verse 21, goes to God, but the breath, the same word in Hebrew for spirit of animals, that goes nowhere. And so what do you see in this season when there's wickedness in place of justice and righteousness? In verse 22, I saw that there's nothing better than to rejoice in your work. Enjoy what you're given to do. You can't see what will come after you. Whether the wickedness will be judged soon, in this season, or later. But you're being tested now, in this season, on whether you fear God. Third, you see oppression in chapter 4, verse 1. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. Like above with wickedness in the place of justice. Behold, look at this, the tears of the oppressed. They're crying. In the past, because of the lashes of slavery, the oppression of segregation. Or now, maybe the victims of crime, often which could be prevented, but it's not. The silent screams of the aborted, or the future tears of the children and the youth who are now being lied to that they can become a sex other than the one they're born into, and who will be mutilated or irreparably damaged by drugs, all to fulfill the demented fantasies of some people in our culture, that reality is whatever we want it to be. There is weeping of the victims of these delusions, our delusions that we are our own creator. And there's no way to comfort them. There's no one to comfort them. The oppressors have power. They have the courts, the police, the army on their side. Now they have the schools, the universities, the media, social media, who will oppress you if you dare to say something that they don't want you to believe. They won't have anyone to comfort them either, even if for now, in this season, they don't think they need comfort. There's so much oppression in verse 2 that those who've already had their time to die are better off for not seeing any more of it. Better still, in verse 3, are those who've not yet had their time to be born, that they've not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun, the ongoing oppression. Fourth, envy. Then I saw, in verse 4, the rat race. See all the work, the long hours, the toil, all that people deprive themselves of, depriving yourself maybe, of fun, of pleasure, trips to the beach, family, sleep, your favorite shows, watching college football, church. Can't make it to church because we got to make more money. All to get ahead, to get a better house, a better car, better vacations, more gadgets, more stuff, more and better than the next guy, the guy next door. You envy him. You envy what he has. You want what he has, or you want better, or to be the richest in the family. The one they talk about with the most cash and the most houses, the successful one. This also, that is this being driven by envy, the quest to be the high flyer. He says in verse 4, this also is vanity. It's vapor. It's like smoke. See it for a second and it dissipates. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of life. It's wind chasing. You can't catch it, and even if you do, you've caught nothing. Then, solution then, do nothing. Be lazy, sleep late. Spend your life parked on the couch, stuffing your face with Doritos while watching TV. Is that it? Oh no, that's the way of the fool, he says in verse 5. He folds his hands because he's got nothing to do. Nothing to put in his hands. And he says he eats his own flesh. He's consuming himself. And he will eventually have nothing to live off of. Instead of the lazy fool devouring himself on one extreme, or the greedy rat on the wheel, always running, always scurrying for another crumb, another cent, always more. 2 handfuls of toil. He can't fold his hands. They're full of work. Instead of that, on the other extreme, better is a handful of quietness, he says. One handful of quietness. One hand may be at work, sure, but the other at rest. Some stillness. Some time off. A closed shop for a day a week, even if you lose some money on Sundays, so you can go to church. Sure, you'll make a little less. You'll make less money. You won't be quite as rich. You may not be able to afford a beach house or a New York apartment, but it will be better than 2 handfuls of toil, which is in the end wind chasing. Fifth, what do you see in this season of living under the sun? Vapor. There's that word again in verse 7. Again, I saw, what's he see? Vanity, vapor, a puff of wind, a whiff of smoke, an illusion that appeals to your ego, to being vain, the strut of having the most expensive handbag, or the looks you get from driving the best car. You look at this season of life under the sun, and that's what you see. Someone who has no family but works and works, never satisfied, but never asks himself in verse 8, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? That's vanity and an unhappy business. Doesn't matter how successful he is, in the end, it's an unhappy business. Better at least have someone to work for. People today sacrifice family for career. Spend their life working, they say often for their family, and then their family is gone because they ignored it while working so much. Forgetting that career isn't worth anything if it doesn't help someone else. Two are better than one. Having a companion to work for in verse 9. If you fall, you break your leg, you have someone to pick you up, take you to the hospital, take care of you. Woe to the one who is alone when he falls. And verse 10. This is what a church is supposed to be. A spiritual family that will lift you up if you fall. To work alone, unwarmed by a companion, without partners, is vain. It's vapor. It may look like something for a second, but then there'll be nothing there. So be intertwined with others like a threefold cord, so you're not quickly broken. Just you alone? That's vain. 6, last, you see in this season of life under the sun, you see the youth. You see a new generation. Maybe now Generation Z, whatever that is. Oh, they're going to be different. They're going to be better. Generation what? The baby boomers, they were so materialistic and hedonistic. After them, they were this, they have this problems. But the new generation, they'll solve all the problems. They'll overcome everything we fell into. So have hope for the future because of this rising generation, starting verse 13. The poor but wise youth, some rising young star. He's better than the old and foolish king who won't take advice. The old generation that won't learn, is stuck in its ways. But you have a hope because there's a new leader on the horizon. A young man. He's risen through the ranks. The new generation. The young leader. He'll make things right. So you see all the living in verse 15 who move about under the sun, along with that youth, this rising star from among them, who'll finally turn things around, who'll finally build something that will last. Finally, you can see it's the youthful leader coming. He'll do it for us. A new order of the ages. He'll end injustice. He'll establish righteousness. He'll let us have the rewards from all our work. Who'll be our big brother. And he leads. He leads the revolution. He leads the reform. He leads us into a new season. So we put up statues in his honor. His picture is on the money. And when he's long gone, he won't be celebrated anymore. They'll find something to criticize. They'll tear down his statues and imagine that they are better than him. Surely, at the end of chapter 4, this also is vanity. It's vapor and a striving after wind. Just more wind chasing. So what do you see in this season of living? A whole lot of nothing. Your heart yearns for more, for something eternal, something that lasts. And you keep trying to build it with your work, your hands, but you end up empty-handed. But the one thing you can see that's not nothing is what God has done. The salvation He worked through Jesus, that we spent those 6 months in Romans surveying, it lasts. It's eternal. The church Jesus is building. Nothing can prevail against it. It lasts. So God is testing you now in this season whether you believe that. Or do you believe that you'll finally catch the wind? Tomorrow, a little more work, you'll finally get it. We can see which one you really believe. What do you see? We can see what you believe by how you spend your life. By what's in your hands. Are they folded? Did you just waste your life? Or do you have 2 handfuls full of toil, of work, too busy working to hold on to anything else? Or are you grasping, laying your hands by faith on the Lord who endures forever? What can we see in your hands